Okay, we're recording and we are live streaming, so anytime you're ready.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to 2025. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. One, I want to just confirm that we do have a quorum if we've made that count. Lisa or Linda, can you confirm that?
Yes, we do have a quorum.
All right. Let's first take a motion to approve the agenda that was sent out for tonight's meeting. Do I have a motion?
This is Antoine.
I'll make a motion.
This is Antoine. I'll second it then.
Thank you, everybody. Do we have all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda is passed. And then approving the minutes for the last meeting. That was the meeting just before the holiday. So do we have a motion to accept the recording of the WebEx virtual meeting from December 11th?
I move to accept the recording.
Any second?
I'll second.
I'll second.
And all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the minutes from the past meeting are passed as well. All right. So with that, I will turn it over to Linda, who we're hoping can make it through. Along with Linda, is Randolph with you, or?
Unfortunately, Randolph is not able to make it this evening, but Randolph Mitchell did prepare a report that I sent out to you all today. That report was an update from a 2012 inventory of adequate public facility ordinances from all jurisdictions that have an APFO ordinance in the state of Maryland. That was done by the Maryland Department of Planning that you all had referenced earlier. We only did it for our immediate surrounding jurisdictions of Anne Arundel. So we updated that for Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Frederick, Montgomery, and Prince George's County. So, that was about 12 years ago. And, from what you can see from the information provided, really only one jurisdiction had any real changes to their testing requirements, and that was Howard County. And that was the addition of us adding stormwater drainage to our APFO requirement. But it's not really a testing requirement. It's the fact that, as we said, it was just adding that as an additional evaluation. Do you have adequate stormwater management for this development prior to it being constructed? So that was the additional testing requirement that was added since 2012 to our APFO requirements. So the main tests that we focused on in our review were the same tests that were in the 2012 report, which were schools, roads, water, sewer, storm drainage, fire, and police. The reason, and I know there was a question earlier from Mr. Casagrande regarding, other tests for senior centers and things like that. We did not add those tests in because there aren't any traditional tests. Again, Prince George's County is the only other jurisdiction that references tests for Parks and Recreation. And again, they do Parks and Recreation, and a certificate of adequacy is required for fire suppression, but those are just certificates of adequacy. There is no level of service or that type of testing requirement. So we were really honing in and focusing on that level of service or that adequacy test. Those tests are you adequate or are you not? Or do you have something or don't you have something? So that was really the focus of the particular chart itself that we have presented and submitted to you all. So that's why that asterisk that said on page 2 of the summary table, facilities such as senior center, libraries, and parks did not have a level of service standard on traditional APFO regulations. and therefore were not mentioned in the table above. That's why we only included those items, because it just wasn't really relevant, in our opinion, to what we were trying to get at above. And then we also have a notation for facility types such as schools, roads, water and sewer drainage, and police and fire, which were more typical level of service or adequate or inadequate or approaching inadequate service types. So then we also gave you sources for each jurisdiction of where the different titles within their ordinances that their adequate public facility regulations are found, and then try to give some type of synopsis of the regulations. Excuse me. So if you look on page 3 of the report, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and then I'll go through the presentation as well. Can you see my screen with the
Yes.
Yes, I can. Yes. Yeah.
Can you see it big enough?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what the screen is showing you is the adequate level for schools for the jurisdictions that we reviewed in the testing. So again, Howard County was again looking at ourselves first, and how we defined open and closed, and then the percentage of closed schools is 9%. We did Anne Arundel County. We looked at the percentage of closed schools, 8%. Baltimore County has the adjacent 115% of state rated capacity, or adequacy in the CIP adjacent district. So they do that adjacency component as well. And then they have a total of 8% of their schools closed. Frederick County was very interesting. They actually do the 100% capacity rating, 100% of state rated capacity rating. And I'll show you a chart that we're going to have in our presentation. Out of their 11 total high schools in the county, 7 are closed, which I thought was really stunning. I'm not quite sure why they do that. Don't have any insight. That would really require a lot of further investigation, maybe even doing interviews. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole. They may have their own rationale for that and their own political reasons too of why they do that sort of thing. They did have a lot of fast growth in the last 10 years. They kind of maybe were where Howard County was 15 years ago in the last 5 years. So, everyone has their reasonings for doing certain things. But again, that's where Frederick County is. Montgomery County's ratings, Prince George's County, and 20% of their schools are closed in Prince George's County. And again, all of this is provided on the webpage. And then again, the transportation was the next bucket that we looked at as well. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this. You can read this all for yourselves, but kind of the description of what it is, and then what the adequacy was in 12 and what it is in 24, and what the relationship is within our county code. So that's what we provided here. Sewer service as well. And again, pretty much no change through all the jurisdictions about how sewerage is handled. Stormwater management, again, some code changes throughout all the jurisdictions that we reviewed and changes within the stormwater management, but nothing really outstanding within that. Fire service, again, we don't really handle fire service as an adequacy in those terms. Again, Anne Arundel County has a development passes the test for adequate fire suppression for facilities if the scheduled completion of the development of the public water supply system or private protection water supply system approved by the Office of Planning and Zoning after consultation with reviewing agencies will be capable of providing adequate fire flow. They added a development may be retested for adequacy of fire suppression of facility as a condition preceding to the final approval and permit issuance. So they test twice. So basically at their initial development testing phase, and then right before they issue their final plan approval. And that's kind of typical in some jurisdictions where you may do multiple points of testing to proceed further in the process. Prince George's County, again, they changed how they do fire as well. And they added some information on that the fire chiefs shall submit to the county Office of Audits and Investigations and the County Office of Budget and Management a statement reflecting adequate equipment in accordance with studies and regulations by the county or the public safety master. So basically that they're saying that they are adequately supplied for fire. Brent, you had a question?
Thank you. We only had about 2 hours to look over this before the
Yep.
meeting, but one thing leapt out, Carroll County, they're going through their APFO review. They cover the traditional schools and roads, but also fire, police, EMS, and other things.
And they
They're
do a
adjacent.
concurrency management for those as well. So yeah, we're aware, and we did not, because we were looking at counties that are faster growing. And they are really not a fast growing county at all. So that was the reason we did not select Carroll.
And I did see one of our councilwomen got a chance to critique this at great detail. So I'm kind of curious the thoughts on that one.
I'm sorry, who got to critique this?
It looks like Miss Rigby had her aides review the materials here and provide a critique that was sent out to us today.
Oh, okay, good. I didn't see that critique was sent out.
Ultimately,
Brent,
to see whether we're capable.
I know that they evaluated and they did the same evaluation. I didn't see a critique though of
Yeah, it was the last few pages
but
after
not
these
our
charts.
critique of what we looked at with them. Basically they had looked at it too, and we were kind of comparing where they were and where we were, what we found and what they found. So it wasn't a critique of what we did. It wasn't a critique of what happened. It was just a critique of, did we all match up? Did we all find the same things? That's all that was, Brent. And I'm sorry, it should maybe not have said that. I should have removed that from this, but they did the same research. So we were just kind of looking at it in comparison to make sure that our notes compared, that we didn't find something or they didn't find something we didn't find.
Thank you. I mean, it all adds up in how we interpret these
Right, that's all. We're just
pieces
making
of
sure we're all
information.
on the same page. Kind of more being helpful than butting heads, I guess I should say.
So just to clarify, so Brent, there wasn't an email that came from
No, that's what I
Councilwoman
thought
Rigby's
he was saying,
office,
yeah.
right? Okay, so it's just this basically appendix to the end of the information that you provided us. Is that right, Linda?
Yeah, it was just that we were kind of working
Okay.
together. They had done some stuff, we had done some stuff. So we were just kind of comparing notes.
Okay, thank you.
So now kind of going to the presentation. So kind of to synthesize this, again, here's the inventory of the surrounding jurisdictions. Again, as we know, Anne Arundel does fire, they do not do police. Montgomery does police and fire. Prince George's does the most. They do stormwater management, police, and fire. And again, you know, everyone does stormwater management. We know that you have to have adequate stormwater management when you have a development. It's just, are you calling it an adequate public facilities ordinance or not? And everyone wants to make sure you have adequate fire and adequate police service at the end of the day, right? Like you're not gonna not have adequate fire and police for new development. Just, are you gonna put it into an adequate public facilities ordinance or have it happen at other times in the development process? You know, when we develop in Howard County, part of our development review process and our subdivision review committee, we have fire there. They make sure that fire hydrants are available. They make sure that there is adequate road widths for fire and emergency vehicles to be able to make it down a road. If it's a use in common driveway, can it make it down? Can their equipment make it down a use in common driveway? Are there adequate pull-offs? Or is there an adequate turnaround for them to come down that use in common driveway? So those things are thought about. What is the closest police station? What is the closest fire station? But is there a direct test? No, but are those things considered 100%? So do jurisdictions that, even if they're not part of your adequate public facilities, still consider those? Absolutely, just in different ways. It's just not a test, so to speak, like these other different areas are that are checked off here on the table. Does that make sense? So I don't think it's good or bad. It's just different. Each jurisdiction just does it a different way. And so then the below table and graph show percentage of closed schools at each level of the public school system for selected Maryland jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction's closed school status is based on the percentage of state rated capacity designated by jurisdiction specific policy. So, you know, we're the first one here with elementary, middle, and high, and kind of looking at the table below for the Maryland school system's percentage of closed selection by jurisdiction. All data was taken from the most recently produced school feasibility study and utilization report from selected jurisdictions. So this kind of shows where we stand out for closed schools by jurisdiction. So Frederick, obviously being at 100%, has the most schools closed. And where we really have most of our schools closed, as we know, is in our elementary.
Linda, this is Paul. A question on that. So this talks about using state-rated capacity as the measure, yet Howard County doesn't use state-rated capacity.
Yeah, so if
based on what I
this
read.
is where we would be.
Okay, but in fact, we have more than that closed because we use a local capacity.
Local rated capacity. That's a very good point. Thank you for pointing that out.
And can you tell me a little bit more about how did we get local rated capacity and when did that happen? Because I did a little comparison of the two, and if we used state rated capacity, we would have considerably more open schools.
Right, and you can see that evidence from the chart here. I can't really speak to that. I'm not sure the history behind that. I don't know if that's something that Dan feels comfortable. I don't want to put him on the spot, but if that's something you feel comfortable talking about, Dan.
I mean, I could talk about how the local rated capacity is created. I don't know the history of why APFO specifically identifies to use the local rated capacity, but the local rated capacity methodology is board approved, making sure that the schools are looked at to serve what we feel in Howard County is the right way to put forth an educational program and count spaces. It doesn't mean we can't do state rated capacity. It doesn't mean that we can't use local rated capacity for certain items, and APFO use state rated capacity. We can make that recommendation if the group wishes. Unfortunately, I don't know the history of why the current APFO uses local versus state rated capacity.
Just for what it's worth, it's a big difference. I ran the numbers just for the next year that's up, and I think 14 or 15 schools are closed. There would only be like 5 or 6 of them closed under state rated capacity.
Yes, and the state rated capacity, we are in our Office of School Planning, we are currently looking at some of the state rated capacities. As an example, Bryan Woods, we were looking at that. Bryan Woods local rated capacity was recently adjusted, and we are looking to adjust the state rated capacity. Everybody should understand and know that we cannot change the state rated capacity on our own. We can review it and make a recommendation to the state, but it's the state that identifies or agrees that yes, or they check our calculations and agrees to change it or makes modifications. I would guess one reason that we use local rated capacity is to have the local control. And being able to say, if in Howard County, this is what we say a capacity should be, then this is what we would want them to be, versus looking at a state rated and saying it should open up this many, because then you're starting to mix local control versus the state numbers. But again, I don't know the history behind that use.
Frank, can you answer that? Do you have an answer? You had your hand up. But if you
Yeah. Some of the history, if you watch the old board docs or the ancient VHS videos of these things.
Oh, VHS, I don't know if anyone has that capability.
Go back to the Board of Ed was setting the required amount of square foot for a classroom at the time of the original APFO considerations. And they had a different size of classroom than the state is. So in order to reflect it, they created the local rated capacities, and they tied it to APFO. And it's been tied to it throughout the entire process. And obviously APFO can be adjusted by adjusting the state rated versus local, or you could update it versus in the form of what your capacity thresholds are. Either way, one concern that came up in multiple APFO committees that have occurred over the years is that somebody would just pull out the spreadsheet, calculate it, and whatever benefits development interests versus educational interests would go with whatever benefits them the most and try to switch the standard. The standard itself is a pretty consistent measure. It's how you adjust the other APFO criteria against it, or you could game it and switch the standard to somebody's benefit or detriment. Thank you.
And gaming works both ways.
Brent, quick question.
Changed, though.
Quick question, given your depth of knowledge here, is there any mechanism that enables the county's elected officials on the board or the county executive to weigh in on those calculations and how they're run?
That's a good point. Let me think how to answer that correctly. At every level, this APFO, when we're done and make our recommendations, goes to the council and the administration. They're going to write a bunch of proposed changes and vote on them. So typically during that phase is when they had the most direct input. However, there's been a lot of new regulations, and Dan will probably be able to correct me, which require yearly as well as more frequent updates where the Board of Ed and council talk with each other about all these various items, which, as you know, can be amended any particular legislative cycle.
But I guess my question is, if the school board can make a determination to revise the local rated capacity and therefore basically completely change the charts, does the executive or the council have the ability to do anything? Or
Yes.
do they just, because as it
Absolutely.
stands now, as I understand it, the chart goes to the council every year. The Board of Ed provides the chart to the council, and the council can vote yes or no. They can't vote. They can't vote well, or they can't say, well, what about this and what about this? They just have to vote yes and no. So the question is, you're right. I mean, we're revising APFO and we're looking at percentages, but if then the calculation changes to close more schools.
Absolutely right. Things like changing class sizes. Eventually, when they trickle down to readjustments of capacity ratings of schools, that also affects things. And you can see there have been many, many bills between now and the previous APFO committees to adjust thresholds, percentages, and things of that nature over the years. So yes, the administration and council, they have an open window every 30 days to adjust whatever they want. They don't have to do it during the APFO cycle. And they have done attempts to adjust it outside the cycle frequently. I could probably rattle off 20 if you needed those for reference.
Now, I'm just looking at making sure that the elected officials that represent the entire county, not just the schools, have the ability to have an impact on the calculations that have such a material result on the county's finances.
They do, and trust me, I've been testifying for a decade, that each and every change to this mathematical equation has a downstream result. I'll yield to Mr. Lubley, who's an expert on this.
I don't know what that means, but maybe Dan does.
Well, and I was just going to ask a clarifying question. I believe what question that you're asking, Todd, is does the county executive or county council have an ability to change the methodology, correct? Because you're talking about the calculations, not necessarily the number used, but the way that the local rated capacity is calculated, correct?
Yeah, that's correct, because the way that's calculated has a direct result on the chart that gets approved or that gets submitted, which determines which schools are open and which are closed for development.
And that I don't know unless you have a different perspective here, Brent. That I don't know if the county council or the county executive have a direct say in how it's calculated, because that is a Board of Education approved methodology in how the local rated capacity is calculated. Now, which one is utilized in the APFO chart is something that can be decided and written into APFO. But I'm not sure the county executive and county council can define how the calculations are made.
I'm just going to the issue of checks and balances more than anything else. And that's that, if the school board determines that, hey, don't you think we need another 10% square footage per classroom because we're increasing our class sizes from 26 to 27, for argument's sake. And that means that now the local rated capacity for a school might go from 600 to 560, which takes it from open to closed. What incentive and what check and balance is there on the school board, and where does the power lie between the school board and the council and the executive? I mean, there's no incentive for the school board to be responsible other than the need to look responsible. And if all the council and the executive can do is vote yes or no on the chart that's provided, and the chart is based on the methodology that only the school board has control over, that seems to me an imbalance between elected officials and the school board. I know the school board's elected too, but the elected officials in the county at large, as opposed to the schools specifically.
I would say
Yes,
there's
and I would.
Sorry, Dan.
Sorry, Brent. I would also just add in, I know they all kind of tie together, but it can be very complex and confusing to start to say, well, if a class size increases, therefore the local rated capacity is going to increase. And I know you're given an example. That's not really how it works. When a class size increases, it's really the ratio of teacher to student that increases, not really the methodology of how to determine the capacity of a facility increases. I get exactly what you're saying. That's an example when you're trying to look for the checks and balances more in your question. But I do want to make that clarification so that people aren't making that tie that if a class size increase is voted on, then the local rated capacity is changing, this is changing, that's changing. I would also like to point out again, I think there would be better opportunity with still using the local rated capacity with collaboration between the school board, the county council, county executive versus utilizing state rated capacity, because the state's going to look at what they figure out and what they determine for the betterment of the entire state and not necessarily what Howard County is going to say. So I think if we did go that way, which is not what you're currently recommending, but if we did go that way, there could be less control of what you're trying to look at with checks and balances. Because at that point, it would be at the state's discretion, hopefully with our input, but typically not.
But as
Sorry, this is Vanessa Pantano.
Go ahead.
Can I just say one thing here about like Brantwoods comes up repeatedly, and there's a reason for that, because as some of you might recall from the last meeting, there's a large discrepancy in the state numbers versus local Howard County number for capacity. And I can say, as a parent at that school, if we use the state number, our school would not be functional. There's absolutely no way the school could house or accommodate the number of students the state thinks can somehow fit in that building. We already have 4 portables and we're over capacity at our current capacity of 289. The state puts us at 438, completely untenable at a school the size of our school. So using the state rated capacity would cause numerous problems. And, the earlier suggestion, I think by Paul, saying, well, if we use the state, we could open more schools, would have significant impact on the schools itself. And using Bryant Woods as the most currently overcapacity school in the county, the school would not be functional at that point. So I don't know if we've gotten that information back about where the state gets that number and how they get that and why there's such a big discrepancy between the local number of 289 versus 438 from the state. So that was from the last meeting. And hopefully we get that information at some point soon. But again, that impacts which number we use as a committee to determine what is open and what is closed. Those numbers, our Howard County local numbers, would be a much more accurate measure to use when making these decisions than the state numbers in this particular example.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I also want to point out that my understanding is the local capacity numbers do not include the space in schools that are used for pre-kindergarten programs, whereas the state numbers do include the space in elementary schools used for pre-K. So we are comparing apples and oranges where, some schools, especially schools with a lot of pre-K classrooms, are counting that space, whereas the local numbers do not count that space.
Just to follow on that, Jeremy, also in the case of Bryant Woods, that only gives us 35 extra seats if we count the pre-K space. So it still doesn't bridge the gap between the state and the local that exists. So yes, you're correct, Jeremy, that our local numbers do not count the pre-K, and that then increases or decreases the amount of usable space in a school. However, and makes our numbers not entirely accurate, our capacity numbers that are local. But it still doesn't explain, if we use the state's number, our school would not be functional.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Vanessa. I was just trying to make the broader point that, like, the idea that we should use the state numbers that count that, across the board, that count pre-K space can't do it if the local numbers are not including pre-K.
Yes, that's true in terms of comparison. Mm-hmm.
So we had someone explain the state rated capacity to us, and there's a slide deck from 1 or 2 meetings back, but what we don't have is how the local rated capacity is computed. So it might be useful to have that as some basic information.
Yeah, I could send that to Linda. What I would point out is if anybody wants to look at it right now, if you go to the Howard County Public School System board docs and go to the June 20th, 2023 meeting, the annual feasibility study was presented on June 20th. I forget exactly what page it is in there, but it does lay out how the local rated capacity and the state rated capacity are calculated in that document.
Daniel, you can point me to that. I can pull it up for the group. So I'm going to the documents, and then you said go to
If you're on board docs, go up to meetings. And then go to year 2023.
Okay.
And then scroll down until you hit June 20th.
I see June 28th and a June 22nd.
I'm sorry, I said 2023. I meant 2024. Sorry. My mind is still in 2024 and I'm going back a year.
Okay, I know, I'm with you. Did 24 even happen?
In some extent, yes.
Okay. And then I should go to,
If you click on view agenda,
yes.
and then In the evening session, the 7 o'clock session, it's towards the bottom of the agenda. You'll see the feasibility study.
Okay.
There
Chair,
should be two attachments. One's a presentation and one's the report. If
Gotcha.
you provide the link to the report, in the report, there is the calculations for both the local rated, or how it's the methodology for the local rated capacity and state rated capacity.
did we want to look at that this evening too while we're here? I'll leave that to the group.
Any thoughts? I'm a little reluctant to try to do that on the fly, but I will defer to the collective decision of the group.
All right, well, we're going to send it to the group now. Well, then we can continue with the presentation. I don't want to get sidetracked. So just really quickly, just to kind of finish up. And I see Paul has a question as well.
Nope, I'm done. I chimed in without waiting to be called.
Okay. So let me go back to sharing my screen here. So basically going to wait times, Howard County is 4 years. So Alpha school test wait times, Howard County is 4 years, Baltimore is 4 years, Anne Arundel is 6 years. As you know, from working with Montgomery County, there's no wait time, is replaced with the utilization premium payment. Frederick is 5 years, and Prince George is in a similar vein to Montgomery County, has the surcharge only. And then with regard to exemptions, and this is for Howard County only, so we do a single lot exemption in the rural west. If your lot is for a family member only, we exempt. So if you're in a closed district, these are the exemptions. If there's a particular financial hardship, if it's a replacement unit from like a mobile home, say it's falling down in disrepair, you can one-for-one replacement. A redevelopment site of existing unit again. Age restricted units again, because 55 and older, they're not producing children that would be school age into those units. So again, there's no schools test for that. MIHUs do not need the allocations. However, they still must pass the school capacity test. And then for special affordable housing opportunities by a county council resolution. And so most recently, this would be the Patuxent Commons complex that utilized this particular exemption. So that's how this all stacks up. You have the report for how other jurisdictions do it. You know, it's kind of different depending on the jurisdiction. Everyone utilizes what's best for their county and where they are at any particular time. I think one thing that's interesting is like kind of going back to that Montgomery County model, and they're reviewing it frequently. You know, they're doing every few years. You know, we wait every 10 years. Should we be updating our frequency a little more so? Maybe that's something that would be a good recommendation for this committee if we feel that, you know, 10 years is too long to wait after a general plan development. Maybe that's something to consider. You know, it just kind of depends. I know Brent said that Carroll County is doing theirs. You know, maybe the time is right for them for whatever reason. They updated their master plan 10 years ago. There was no changes. I know they do their concurrency management every few years. They do review that, depending on what the needs are. And if they see that things are approaching inadequate, they'll go ahead and review and see if there's any changes that need to be made. Brent?
Just keep in mind, to put this in context, we do have a considerable amount of exemptions requested both in the general plan and among the affordable housing groups, which we had the presentation on. Also, keep in mind the state bill, pardon me if I don't have it off the top of my head, is going to start mandating certain criteria too, which are effectively exemptions. And
so House Bill 538, which is the governor's housing package, excludes APFO requirements from the exemptions. Right now, they are calling unreasonable hardships things that have to do with lot size, height, bulk regulations, setbacks, and financial hardships that your local jurisdiction has made things so onerous that essentially kills the project within your TOD zones or your owned and controlled nonprofits. So right now, APFO is still on the table. However, with all of our TODs except for one,
Linda.
we're closed. Yes.
TOD, transit-oriented
Thank you,
development.
transit-oriented developments. We have 5 in the state bill, which we'll get into. So I'm going to be honest, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about this at our February meeting. We'll dive more deeply into this, but to Bren's point, right now there is no APFO provision that was pulled off the table before the legislation was passed in 24. Not to say it couldn't come back around. And you all can definitely make recommendations if you want to see that bill really be utilized in Howard County. That may be some changes that you all may want to make. Lisa?
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you for this data collection. It's very exhaustive and a lot of info. I would have liked to have seen some other things that the other jurisdictions are doing beyond the charted list of comparison categories, because even though there are not actual tests, LOS things in, say, for example, health, which is very difficult. We know that having any kind of test for health with regard to the hospital or emergency room would be really hard, probably, close the county forever. But it would be good, though, to kind of know what mentioning of health. I know there's at least 1 or 2 other counties that mention it. I know they don't do necessarily measurements, but they mention some things. We might learn, just have some advice and learn, what are they saying about that, even if it's not a measurement. And health tends to slide into the safety category, like some the fire personnel was talking about at our hearing about worrying about enough EMS people and how that affects response time and, having a big set of growth somewhere. Do we have enough fire stations? Do we have these things planned out correctly? I like the idea of some of the mentioning of going through some review process amongst the experts who are planning these things versus physical tests and closings. I mean, I think some of those points in even other categories that aren't on this chart might give us some advice on how to feel better about certain capacity concerns that don't necessarily or are difficult to apply only via tests. So didn't know what people thought about that. Thank you.
I have a quick thought there. It seems to me that when the general plan identifies a number of lots it's expecting to be delivered and units to be built on an annual basis, it seems to me that public safety issues and health issues are incumbent. It's incumbent upon the county to be preparing for that, as opposed to an individual development of 18 homes or something. I don't know how an individual project can contemplate whether or not there's enough police or fire or capacity at the hospital, when in fact the council and the executive, when they say we're anticipating 1,500 units per year, they have to be anticipating that they have to deliver or staff the police, the fire, and be working with the hospital to accommodate those 1,800 units. Am I off base there? As opposed to having an individual limited subdivision development or apartment building dealing with what's really a big county issue.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Your point is well taken, and I think a bird's eye view of a total allocations, so to speak, what you're saying makes sense. But we did change a lot of shift of thinking with, for instance, allocations used to be regional, and now they're of a certain character and type. And so, my concern is that you know, we might look data wise okay on Moss of a whole county total basis on these things, but we still need to take a regional viewpoint. And even though I don't think it makes sense to go into that detail in a measurement way in every development everywhere in the county, if we look at large plans, like Erickson coming in, it's giant things that are going to stress regional infrastructure. That's kind of what I'm talking about. And that's what the fire union guy was talking about too.
Yeah, I would just like to second, I was one of the folks that asked a follow-up earlier today when we got the materials. I would like to see what other items other counties are looking at. I mean, just knowing which counties look at what items would be helpful. I understand if, you know, the testing that they either do or don't do may be difficult to apply or amorphous. I just would like the understanding of what other counties are including in their analysis.
Well, I think, Aaron, that goes to like what we were discussing before. I mean, you know, I think I had said like from Prince George's County, they are looking at I'm sorry, park and rec adequacy, and they have to give an adequacy certificate. But to be honest, I mean, there's not like, I think you had mentioned earlier that Baltimore County was doing parks. We found no evidence of that. So if you
So I
have
guess
other sources of
Yeah.
information, just we're not seeing from an APFO perspective where anyone else is doing anything beyond the list that we had presented. So I know you saw that asterisk, but the asterisk I was really just pertaining to Prince George's County with that park and rec and the fire suppression.
Okay, that's what was, I think, throwing me because, you know, it references things like libraries, and so nobody.
We were just putting it in a blanket and saying that that was just kind of looking at all those things that we had kind of discussed, but really it was only Prince George's County that was looking at park adequacy, and that was that certificate of adequacy was required. You know, we talked about like the Anne Arundel County had that fire suppression and that the note from the fire chief type of thing, but no one's really looking at libraries and senior centers that we had any evidence of.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I just want to respond to Lisa's earlier suggestion about health overall. And my perspective comes from working in hospitals for over 30 years and working in the healthcare environment in this county for over 30 years. Unless the county is funding it, and that would be recruitment of new physicians to come to the community, funding construction of more hospital capacity, which, by the way, is governed by state certificate of need requirements. Really, the only area of health, which I think Lisa appropriately pointed out, is fire and rescue capacity, which is the ambulances. But the other areas, I think we get into a slippery slope if we bring those into APFO, because it's not something that the county funds at this point. And I don't think it has any intentions of doing so going forward.
Let me go back, if you wouldn't mind answering Aaron's question. So when I say we're not looking at those things, Aaron, it's not from an APFO perspective. I think back to Todd's point, you know, all of what we're asking to do here is when a particular development is built, do we have adequate facilities, so to speak, public facilities for the development, and what is like reasonable and rational for that and proportional to that development. But we do have other mechanisms that we do look at those things. Like, for instance, Maryland Department of Natural Resources requires each local jurisdiction every 5 years to do a land preservation parks and recreational plan. So that's something that our Rec and Parks Department has to submit. Do we have adequate park and recreational resources? And it's not just how many acres do we have, but where are those acres situated for your population centers? Are they within so many miles? What type of facilities do you have? So we have that bucket. We work with Maryland Department of Transportation and our own county government to make sure our roads are adequate. So there are different buckets of different things that make sure that the county is a whole. So this is just another aspect for when something gets developed to make sure that we have things. We have libraries, we have schools. So I guess what I'm saying is this is just one aspect of one particular thing. So it's not really the catch-all and the be-all and end-all to make sure that Howard County is made whole from when something is built. It's just to kind of do a check. Do we have certain things that are immediate? And what is the immediacy and the nexus? And I think the reason we focus on schools, because most likely a new housing unit will have at least a student being generated from it. And this is the greatest predictor of a student being generated. That's not, and that's a public service that we offer, but not necessarily the greatest user or predictor of someone using a park or a library or a senior center. I think maybe that's kind of why we use this test for schools and roads, because we know this will be the greatest predictor of those other things. But we do have other mechanisms in which we plan for these other public resources, if that makes sense. I don't want you to think that we don't do those things from a state or local level, and those aren't accounted for. So
oh, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you. The way that I read that footnote, I was thinking that other counties may look at those things, but you didn't include them in the chart because they don't have a formal testing regime. But you're saying that they don't look at those at all as part
No,
of
it was just the Prince
APFO.
George, right. And it was just a big chart of nothing, so we just didn't include it, but it was just Prince George's had those two other things, and they're just a certificate more or less, like, yes, we have those. Laura, I think you are next.
Thanks. Yeah, I have 3 things. First of all, when you were talking about the House bill that was passed in 24, I will tell you, I'm on the state legislative committee for the Maryland Realtors, and we've already had a review of what they expect to see come up in this session. And they expect to see a bill basically gutting APFO, because there is a real disdain for APFO at the state level, and they feel like, as you say, it's really hindered a lot of counties.
But define APFO, Laura, the schools APFO or water and sewer APFO. I mean, I think there's certain things that we can't change. Like, I can't make more water come out of nowhere. I can't. So I think maybe I've heard rumblings of the schools, because you can redistrict, you can do other things, but like certain other things are just limited. Like, there's only so many resources we have.
Yeah, but what they're saying is that, like, one of the counties has 6 years. Like, there is one of the provisions of one of the bills of what they're expecting is that they will say that either the time limits are reduced, right? So regardless of whatever it is we say, that from a state level, they might come in and say, you know what, we don't care, 3 years is the maximum. I mean, they're still working on these bills, but there is going to be things coming down where the state is going to say, you know what, counties, too bad, too sad. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I've heard that too, and we're watching that as well, because we're part of our MACA legislative committee for planning and land use. So I have been hearing those same things, and obviously today was the first day of the General Assembly. So yeah. Thank you, and let's definitely keep each other informed. Yeah.
And the two things that I have a question about is, maybe it would be helpful, going to kind of what Aaron said, would be to just get kind of a laundry list of the things that are considered, right, but not a part of APFO, right? So people can sort of checklist and say, oh, we don't have to worry about that. That's considered by a different mechanism, and we don't try to incorporate that into APFO because it's covered another way, right?
So by other jurisdictions, by us, I mean, so I guess, like,
no, by Howard County. By Howard County. No, because
that would be basically our development review process then.
Well, he was asking about, like, parks and stuff like that. So I mean, I just sometimes it's good to say, don't worry about this. It's taken care of a different way. Let's not talk about that. Let's not try to incorporate that into APFO, because it's already being done through a different source. I don't know that we have, you know, an overreaching list of here's everything, this is ABFO, this is not, but yes, it is considered, just not through the ABFO mechanism. That's just my suggestion. And the other question I had is because I was talking to a teacher today. There was no school, and I was talking to a teacher today from Swansfield, and just kind of trying to get her feeling about ABFO schools, school condition, all this other stuff. And she brought up something that I don't see listed in any of these things here, but because they're a Title I school, she was just telling me all the stuff they get because they're Title I. And what her opinion of the makeup of the school was, and she's very happy there and loves it. But I don't see anywhere in here, and especially today, because we're talking about schools, that Title I is mentioned anywhere, what schools are Title I, what they're getting from the federal government because they're Title I, and what that could potentially mean to the capacity of that school. Thank you.
To be honest, I don't know how to answer the Title I question. Dan, if you have any insight into that. I mean, I know they get special financing and funding. Jen, do you have any insight into that?
Well, according to her, it gives them more.
I'm sorry, Jen, you're muted if you were trying to say something.
Yeah, because she was just saying it gives them more teachers, gives them more funds. They picked up 3 more teachers. It helped with the capacity in the classes. I mean, it just seemed to really do quite a bit.
Jen still can't hear you. You're unmuted, but you may need to check like your gear wheel options.
Okay.
Oh, did you
We
say
can hear you.
something? Now we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So Title I, we have 13 Title I schools. They are predominantly centered in Columbia. They are not exclusively centered there, but that is where they are predominantly. And they receive about between 5 and 6 million total across 13 schools. So it is actually not a huge amount per school. Additionally, then how Title I has certain designations of how the funds can and cannot be used. So sometimes they are used to supplement with additional staff, but not all of the funds can be used for that, even if that's what the school wanted. And while in some cases, and in particular Swansfield, which is my neighborhood school, and it's where my kids went, they use some of the funds to have additional staffing and then have those individuals be teachers of record at a particular grade level to, again, supplement the class size. But it truly does not affect it's a very small amount of money compared to the entire budget. And it does not affect the school capacity or the infrastructure. It's rarely going to be more than 3 additional staff. And I don't think it's realistically part of our calculation into how it would affect development and adequate facilities in each of these particular zones.
So you see no benefit or anything to the Title I? I mean, it just sounded to me like it's something that we should be at least somewhere in the formula or in the consideration or, you know, somewhere.
Ms. Mala, your microphone dropped out again.
You're dead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I do not know why this keeps switching on me. But at less than $500,000 per school, there is much greater variance within the school system between schools based on teacher longevity, how much money a teacher earns. So when we move to school by school based budgeting for reporting purposes, you'll see much greater variations based on the amount of long-term teachers that have stayed at a particular, or teachers that are longer, have been in the field longer and are commanding greater salaries, have a larger impact on the per school or per student spending by school than something like Title I. So I'm not sure.
You checked out again, Jen.
Can I hear you? I think one of the factors that come into the question is part of what Ms. Mallow was saying is there's not a guarantee that the Title I funds that are given to a school are used in a specific way. So that also becomes a difficulty in putting that into APFO or anything else, because it makes an assumption that just because it's Title I, there's going to be that extra space need or something. And that may not be the way that the funds are utilized.
And then to be clear, the Title I money it's operating money. It's not capital money. It's not money that's used to increase capacity of the school. Is that correct?
Correct. It's operating money.
Right. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that just, when she was telling me, it sounded like that should be something we should be in some way considering, especially if we're going to be recommending doing this exercise we're doing now on a more frequent basis. Thank you. That's my question. Thanks.
Brent, you had a question? You're muted as well.
You're muted, I think.
Thank you. Big picture, we're looking at all the neighboring counties. We're seeing what they do, what they don't do. But, we can set the bar higher. Anything that is a capital expense that grows alongside our development is fair game to be considered in APFO. Some are more directly geared and some are more loosely oriented, but by the Supreme Court, and you mentioned it earlier, it needs to have a rational nexus in order to be sufficient. But, I was looking at our standards. If we're really going to do this and go up and down the list of key capital items in our county, there are metrics out there. And look at Carroll County. They're looking at fire. They are looking at response time, which is a standard metric that most counties use across the country that have APFO. And they got it down to the second for each and every station. That's the level of detail we need to make good decisions in Howard County. I'm sure there are plenty of fire stations that are within NPFRM criteria, and I'm sure there are some that are without. And as we grow, we're going to need to make sure we're able to accommodate. So just circling back around, just because we don't see a item on some county's chart does not mean we shouldn't be considering it while we had this opportunity. And I get why it's unpopular. It's an obligation to our elected officials. It's an obligation to our developers, and they don't like it, and I don't blame them. But that is the alternative is, Todd, you're doing, I assume, spending affordability again. We don't have the resources or luxury to just assume everything's taken care of externally. And here is our opportunity to take care of the items that can be under this auspice. Thank you.
Linda, one quick question. I don't want to preempt the rest of your discussion. this is a good back and forth. Do we have any sense from those surrounding jurisdictions that you cited whether or not they're getting the housing pace of development that they want in their master plan?
I don't. I know going back to Brent's Carroll County example, they're doing minor tweaks. And as a matter of fact, they're lifting some of their building caps. So as I said before, they don't have like the allocation charts that we have. What they have is you can only pull so many building permits per year. So what they're looking at right now is you can only pull 25 single family permits per year. And for age restricted multifamily, 50 permits. They're actually looking to lift those caps to actually get a little more development because it's been at like less than 300 units per year. And so they're looking to get a little bit more into the county. And as far as the fire EMS, they just went to a paid service. So it was always volunteer. So part of that was to make sure that the volunteers could handle it. Now that they have a paid service, I don't know if they're going to keep with that same concurrency management standard, Brent. They may change that because now they have paid service. Might be a little bit of a different measure. And they also have the municipalities. So they're also a little bit of a different animal because the municipalities, some may have paid fire, and they definitely have paid police. Some of the Mount Airy, Hampstead, Westminster have paid police as well. So it's just kind of a different animal, kind of hard to compare apples to apples between them and us with how they do things there. But, you know, they're not growing like we are. So it's kind of just different. Montgomery County is a growing county. Prince George is a growing county. Anne Arundel and Frederick and Baltimore are growing counties, but we're all growing at different rates. Baltimore's not growing as fast as we are. Montgomery County is still growing pretty fast. Frederick's growing really quickly. Maybe that's why they kind of started reining things in a little more aggressive because they are a much faster growing county. So I'm not sure that answers your question. That's kind of why things are, I think my prediction of why things are the way they are.
Are you going to go through the rest of the slides?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
So that's all I really have for the Outpost. If you have the document in front of you, we can talk more about that later. But again, we're pretty much in the mix with the other jurisdictions that are surrounding us. So now we had some questions in between times that we had asked Tim and Dan to answer for us, just to kind of have a little bit of a deeper dive. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I'm going to go ahead and put them on screen. And, you know, if at any point, you know, Dan, if you want to just elaborate, and I know Todd had a lot of these questions, if you just want to elaborate too on the question itself, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the questions now. And these were all sent to you as well. So the first question was, since the peak enrollment of the 2018-2019 school year, how many schools have moved from closed to open? So the response was 7 elementary and middle schools were closed for the test year of 2018 chart and open for the test year of 2024. And then 17 schools were expected to be closed for the 2027-2028 school year in the 2018 APFO chart, but are open for that year. I don't know, am I explaining this correctly, Dan?
Yes. Yeah, so the question left open a little bit of interpretation. So the way it was done was to compare the test years of the chart. So looking back at the 2018-2019 test year and how that compares to the schools in that same year in the 2024 chart. And then the second numbers that were provided, or the count of the schools that were closed in the old chart for the test year of this chart, kind of go into the next year. And so that's what we provided in the second part there.
So in the second part, these are the schools that are now open that were
No,
closed.
so the first So the first bullet, the 7 elementary and 7 middle schools. So that was the 2018 APFO chart and the test year. And that's how many schools for that specific test year. The second bullet is looking at the 2024 APFO chart and looking back to the 2018 for the test year for the 2024. So back then it would have been even further out, which is the 17 schools, which are now, they were expected they would be closed when we got to this point, but due to the pandemic and the enrollment and all those are not closed. So it's looking at the test year of the 2 different APFO charts.
So 8 years ago, we thought more would be closed, but they're actually open because of the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic threw a big monkey wrench, which changed a lot of things, as well as redistricting a lot of other items that schools were, obviously before the pandemic, we were growing at a much faster rate. And now we're at a point where it ebbs and flows, but we're kind of flattening out. So a lot of variables changed.
Paul, you had a question?
Just what year, just remind me what year the thresholds changed. They had previously all been, I think, 105, and then some moved up. Is that correct? Was that prior to this 2018, 2019? So we're comparing apples and apples.
I believe so. Yes, the thresholds in APFO.
So
Yeah,
18 would have been, so 18 and then now 24 had those same adequacy thresholds.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
that's when it changed.
Okay, thank you.
So we're comparing apples to apples. We're not comparing the different capacity numbers from prior.
Thanks.
Are there any questions on this slide? Todd, did you have any other insight you wanted to add to the 2 questions here?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. So then one of the other questions we wanted to get at was we've had a lot of discussion about portables, trailers, for lack of a better term. So how many trailers were deployed in 18-19, since that was such a big year during the peak of our school system, and how many are still in use today? So in 18-19, there were 217 portables used in the K-12 setting. And in 24-25 school year, there's 221. So actually there was a slight increase of about 4. The peak count was actually in 22-23 of 244. There are an additional 17 units at the central office, Homewood campus, Old Cedar Lane, and 6 units are in use at the Judy Center at Crowder Rock Elementary School and by Rec and Parks program. Why so many in the 22-23 school year? That just is fascinating to me.
I don't recall off the top of my head. I'd have to look back at that. One clarification I do want to make, though, is a lot of people will use these interchangeably, portable versus classroom. And I want to make the distinction. Most of the time when we're talking about relocatable portables, there are single units. We do have modulars out there, which is a single unit, but it has multiple classrooms in it. So you'll notice the response is provided in K-12 classrooms, not portables, which means that there are 217 classrooms, not necessarily 217 portables. It's a small distinction, but I just wanted to make that clear.
So then what's the 244? Is that portables or classrooms?
Classrooms.
So how many portables does that equate to? Just depends, because a portable could be 1 classroom or 5 classrooms.
Correct. And in 2022, 23, I'd have to look exactly what that was. We have since then removed a couple of the older portables. So
And a
it would have
portable
been
could be retrofitted during any school year to be 1 classroom or multiple classrooms, depending on what they need about particular year is. I'm just curious.
It can be. We typically don't do that.
Mhm.
But yes, a modular classroom can be retrofit or renovated to combine classrooms to a certain extent. Typically, if it's at a school, we don't do that. An example where we did do that recently is we moved a 12 classroom modular over to the Old Cedar Lane facility, and it's counted in the modular, but it's not counted as classrooms because it is for administrative purposes. And we did retrofit that one. But in a typical year, we typically don't retrofit the modulars because that becomes very expensive to keep going back and forth.
Interesting. Todd, I'm sorry I'm taking over for you, but I just see Paul's hand up and then Jen.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, mine was up from earlier. Never took it down. Sorry.
We're going to dock you for that one, Paul. Jen?
I just wanted to respond. I think that the 22 to 23 high peak count was probably because of the Hammond renovation. So since the Hammond renovation was concurrent to using the building, there was a very large multi-unit classroom that was used on the Hammond site while spaces were being rehabbed. And so people would cycle in and out of those classrooms. Then when the Hammond renovation opened, and we've decommissioned some since the 22-23 school year, then the Hammond one was moved to Old Cedar Lane and is being installed there for the purposes of offices. So I suspect that was really due to the renovations we had going on at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Continuing on our trailer portables discussion, in 24, so how many schools have trailers? And if they're more than 0, why? So if you have one, why do we have one? So there were 134 portables in the 24-25 school year at schools designated as open. There are many reasons for this. The cost to move a portable is very expensive. Older units would require extensive repairs and reconditioning once relocated. Schools utilize them for support services. Schools may have recently been overutilized and are projected to be overutilized in the future. Enrollment projections have been volatile, and the Board of Education utilization goal is 100%, which is different than the APFO threshold. So I think we kind of knew the answer to these. We've talked about a lot of these types of issues before about why they stay there once they're there. How much new capacity has been added since 1819? So 1,658 seats at that's Guilford High School.
Guilford Park High School,
Yep,
yes.
Guilford Park High School since in 22-23 when that school opened. And correct me if I'm wrong, when that school opened, it was just 9th and 10th grade, and then you've been adding grades since then, so 9th, 10th, and then 11th and 12th. So now they have all 4 years now are going to that school?
They currently have 3 years right now. They will have 4 years, but the question was how much capacity, not how many students are going. So the capacity.
No, I was just asking the question more for me just to understand that my understanding was like you were just taking like the freshman class were the incoming 8th graders from the feeder middle schools, and then you took some 10th graders from other schools to add in, because you weren't just filling up the high school from the beginning and then they were going to matriculate through. Talbot Springs replacement, which was a net increase of 113 students. Hanover Hills Elementary School, which opened, and then Hammond High School renovation, which added 225 seats. So in my basic math, that's 17, 18, 28. So about 2,800 seats or so have been added to the school system in the last 8 years, roughly.
28, 24, yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So, but stepping back, that's 2,800 seats, but at only 4 schools. And we've got how many schools that are constrained and how many that are, stretching. 4 schools in 6 years to get additional capacity. Is that, it seems reasonable given how long it takes for a capital project to get through. And it really is no wonder that portables are being used to more quickly address capacity here.
Correct.
Is-
And
is there-
these projects were all large projects, but even if we were to focus on just an addition project to address specifically capacity, it still would, while it would be a shorter time, it would still be a multi-year process. So it's, unfortunately, building brick and mortar is not something that can just happen and be done the next year.
So given Vanessa's earlier comment about Bryant Woods, that's hundreds over capacity, it could take a decade to address that.
Depending on multiple variables, yes, the time can vary.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Am I wrong? But I think I remember from one of our meetings way back that somebody at some point in time said when they add portables to the schools, it doesn't increase the capacity. Am I wrong? Am I misremembering that?
No, you are correct. So the capacity of a school is the brick and mortar calculation, does not include portables. So if you do include the capacity that's added by portables, that's the functional capacity, but the APFO chart does, and the standard capacity of a school does not include portable space.
So given that this includes one whole high school making up 2/3 of that new capacity, pull that out and you're talking about 800 new seats over the next, what happens over 6 years. So this is a problem going to continue. It's going to continue.
It's 2 new schools, actually, Paul. It's the 1,600 plus seats at the high school, and it's 828 seats at Hanover Hills Elementary. The revisions or replacements, resulted in 113 more at Talbot and Talbot Springs and 225 at Hammond.
Okay.
But so I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right. So since 18, when enrollment peaked, enrollment is down 400 students, give or take, system-wide. We've added 2,800 seats, and we've added to our modular classrooms by only 4 or 5 or something. I think, Dan, is if I have that right. Is that correct?
Not knowing the exact number of portables off the top of my head, yes. I mean, we haven't added a whole lot of portables.
I think it only went up by 4 or 5, something like it.
Right, it hasn't
wasn't
gone
very
up
much.
greatly. If I recall, it's 217 and 221.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a modest, limited increase in modular classrooms, but we've added 2,800 seats. Our enrollment is down, and modular classrooms haven't shrunk. They've actually gone up by a few, which would seem to suggest that our capacity number should have come down by like 5%.
Yeah, but Todd, the modulars aren't included in capacity.
No, I'm not talking about modulars. I get that. I mean, we've added 2,800 brick and mortar seats, while our enrollment has gone down by 400. So we've added a net 2,400 seats from where we were in 18-19, 2,800 minus 400, right? And 2,400 represents what, 4%, give or take, of the 57,000 students we have in the school system. So system-wide, we should be looking at a capacity reduction or usage reduction, I should say, of roughly 4%.
If we look at the whole system and the numbers as a conglomerate, yes. But as you look at
I know.
APFO, yeah,
I know. Yeah.
I mean, the high school I live in the neighborhood that's serviced by Reservoir, and I don't know if that school was like at 145% capacity, and the number of portables that they had in the parking lot was crazy. That new high school has greatly assisted and alleviated that issue there. So it's, you know, some of these new classrooms and new seats are just alleviating the problems that existed.
Yeah.
Sorry,
that-
this is Vanessa Pantano, and I just wanted to say a few things. That one thing that Paul referenced was how long it might take to address the capacity problem in a particular school. Bryant Woods is currently on the capital budget for the first time ever, and the projected date for anything to happen there is 2034, just to give some perspective. The other issue is that the 4-year waiting period exists. However, I'm unclear on the benefit of the 4-year waiting period when, in the case of Bryant Woods, the waiting period occurred and yet nothing changed with regard to the school's situation, yet the project was moved forward, and then that increased the number of students that ended up at Bryant Woods from that project. So even if I understand it correctly, the legacy at Twin Rivers project had the 4-year waiting period, and then the project went ahead and we ended up with more students than we could already even absorb, even given the projections. So that's a different issue than we've sort of been talking about right now. But it also kind of, to me, as an APFO committee, means that there's something we need to look at, given what we were looking at earlier with the different counties that have different lengths of waiting periods. What actually happens during that waiting period to address the problem? And if the problem isn't addressed during the 4 years, then what is kind of the point of the waiting period? So if anybody has any insight on that, I would love to hear it.
Well, Dan, I think when Dan made his first presentation, he said, you know, basically, if a school's overcrowded, there's 3 choices. One is a brick and mortar addition. 2 is redistricting. 3 is add portables. Portables don't count for APFO, so that may alleviate the problem at the school, but it doesn't do anything for APFO. And redistricting is a very challenging endeavor, and I think Ms. Mallow referenced that at one point during our early talks as well. But the point of the 4-year delay is to give the school system the opportunity to pursue one of those or 2 or 3 of those things to alleviate the physical overcrowding at a school. APFO doesn't dictate what the school board does at any individual school. APFO just gives them time to make those decisions.
Sure, that makes sense. And I guess I'm looking at the length of time from when we could possibly even begin to improve Bryant Woods, which is 2034. A 4-year waiting period doesn't touch that. So it's kind of a mismatch. Like, would it help if we extended it or not? And then maybe that's a different conversation for a later date. But in the case of this particular elementary school that continually comes up because of the issues there, the 4-year waiting period did not result in anything being addressed. One example is that we have a maximum amount of 4 portables, 2 of which have been there since 1983. We cannot add more. So that issue could not have alleviated anything during that 4-year waiting period. We already were redistricted recently. So barring redistricting yet again, which has been put on the table again, there isn't really a way to resolve this, yet the project still went through. So I guess I'm wanting us all to keep that in mind when we're making our final decisions on what we recommend for what actually can happen in 4 years. Thank you.
So Vanessa, just a couple things. The 4 years is a maximum, and that's really to say to people, okay, if you don't get it done in 4 years, we're going to give them the approval anyway. And one of the things that potentially is coming down from the state this year, if it does go through, is they might eliminate or shrink or negate waiting periods altogether. And I know what you're talking about over there and what was rebuilt, but that building replaced a building that was already there. There were high rises there, which was Roslyn Rise. And they closed when they tore down Roslyn Rise and they were building the new one. There was a period of time when nobody was living there. So I do know that I don't know what the difference in capacity is from the new, housing to the old housing, but there were multiple high-rise buildings there and they've been replaced by low-rise buildings. So I'm not really sure that that's the, one thing that's causing the problem at that school. I know they added all the apartments over there in the town center and all that. But, to your question about the 4 years, making it longer, honestly, I don't think that's going to happen with the feeling at the state level right now. And the 4 years is just to say to the developers, we won't hold you off any longer than that unless I'm misunderstanding it. And that if you've waited the 4 years, guess what? If the county or the school board hasn't figured it out, you're going to get those development rights and you can move forward. That's my understanding.
So just to say about that building project was projected 40 students, and I believe it yielded 51 students, which at a school like Bryant Woods, whose capacity is 286, that's a significant number. It's also a Title I school, just because we were talking about that. So the change from the low-rise townhouses to the mid-rise apartments definitely yielded more students than were predicted and may in the future, because a portion of them are devoted to affordable housing, if I'm correct. That significantly strained, from conversations with my principal, the school's resources and abilities, especially considering well, I can't get into those details, but anyway, regardless, it added a significant strain to our school. We were already at overcapacity, and the reason people weren't coming from those buildings when they were closed, because obviously there was nobody living there, they were sent elsewhere and were theoretically going to come back. However, we were then redistricted before that project came online, adding around 60 students to Bryant Woods. Then that project went through and we added 50 more, and here we are. So we also, I don't know if I corrected this, but we don't have 4, we have 6 portables at Bryant Woods. That is the maximum amount we can fit on the property. So even though, and I hear what you're saying, that like the developer waits the 4 years and it's up to the school system to fix the problem. However, given that we are projected to not have any improvements made to brick and mortar, we're at maximum portable levels till 2034, it seems the 4-year waiting period did not achieve anything. And maybe there is a factor of the redistricting in the middle of all of that added to the problem. So I don't really know how to factor that in. But at this point, the issue is that our school, that project went through when the school was already having a lot of issues with or without that 4-year waiting period. So it just kind of seems like, yes, I understand it's the maximum we can do, but it didn't help anything in our case. And that project needed to be done. Those townhouses were in really bad shape. They were really run down, and I understand we need more housing in the county. But the impact on Bryant Woods, especially this particular school with this particular population of high poverty levels, has been significant. And I want to figure out how to prevent that in the future, because in this case, it was not prevented.
I think we have Brent and Lisa's hands up, and also Dan Lubley.
Thanks. We kind of started this conversation with a fact that enrollment is decreasing at Howard County Public Schools, whether it be COVID or other reasons. However, enrollment in Howard County is actually increasing. It's just a larger and larger proportion are going to private schools or parochial schools or outside entities. And if that trend changes, we're going to need a lot of capacity. But regardless, all our plans that we're talking about here do not include Columbia Gateway. We just announced we're going to have a new RFP for rezoning all of Columbia. We're going to do missing middle. We're going to do TOD exemptions. We're going to do these state things you're talking about, Laura. There's a lot of potential for a need that vastly exceeds our ability to provide it. Now, I'm a big proponent of mitigation in order to match it, but to Vanessa's point, what do time delays do? Well, they serve multiple purposes. In theory, they're supposed to steer development to where there are resources that are adequate. Do we even have that? Another thing is cost, time, value of money. There is a certain financial penalty for building where we don't have the capability, and so on and so forth. So obviously delays do have an effect, but only so much. You can factor that in the cost of building as well and just proceed as if. And there's a lot of it going on in my community and communities around us where they just buy up land and hold it for 4 years and then proceed regardless of the condition. Ultimately, we're here to try to protect the kids and all the residents here and make sure they have adequate facilities as that growth occurs. And whether that growth is going by a goal or happenstance, it doesn't matter. We still need the APFO, whether enrollment is increasing, decreasing, or flat. When we need it to be able to operate well and efficiently. So our goal should be turning this around to how do we provide that adequate level of service regardless of what the rates of growth are. And can we meet that challenge? Thank you.
I think Lisa, then Dan. I'm sorry. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. So we're looking at a lot of enrollment data, and you know, there are some schools that are obviously much more crowded than other areas. And I just want to caution that when we're looking at countywide, system-wide data and looking at the net, so to speak, of capacity over and under, that I just caution that we remember that the school triggers in APFO are very regional. I mean, you know, down to the school that's near the development and saying, hey, this place needs X, this other place might not. If you have a net in the system, it doesn't necessarily mean that a specific set of projects near an extremely constrained school shouldn't retain their APFO protections. And lastly, I just want to say that we are tasked with sort of discussing what's an appropriate trigger of you know, triggering the weight on the school areas, 105, 110, 115, you know, do we change those? Should they go up? Should they go down? Remember that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with enrollment. And you've used the example before, like if you're going to determine what's a good speed limit for a road, you're not going to change it because more or less people are driving on it. I mean, yeah, it's like we are making a determination of what is an appropriate measurement that we feel should happen. And enrollment's going to go up, it's going to go down. Like Brent said, it's going to go up with a lot of these big projects that are not in the forecasts. And so whatever is determined to be accurate measurements, that's what they are. And whether they're reached or not is just what happens down the road and is going to happen or not happen. And you know, might not happen, and then 5 years later it might be the opposite. But the determination of what's the appropriate trigger is what we need to be discussing. Thank you.
Dan, and then Todd, I see you have your hand raised. And then Antoine.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I was just going to expand on kind of what Brent was saying. And a little bit in response to Vanessa's comments is I think we as a committee also have to take a look at APFO and our recommendations in the light of ideal and realistic. And I think ideally, if APFO put a pause on development and the school system had all the factors that came into play to be able to address that issue, that would be great and ideal. I don't think anybody here is expecting that all those variables do come into play every single year and we can't address them. As an example, if you look in the May 9th APFO report, there are 21 schools that are closed. Unfortunately, with the funding that is available, it's just not realistic to address 21 schools capacity wise. So I was, like I said, just as a committee, I think we need to look at this as what would be ideal for APFO in our recommendations, but also what would be a realistic recommendations of what we want APFO to achieve. Knowing that we're not working in a bubble and we are looking at kind of one aspect, but that's not the only aspect that reality plays on our schools and projects going forward.
Todd and then Antoine.
Yeah, just a quick question. Linda, you might know the answer to this. Have we overlaid the schools chart, the closed schools in the schools chart with the activity centers and the TODs that are identified as the projected or desired areas of growth by the HOCO by Design?
Yes.
And are those schools more or less likely to be closed than schools in general in the county?
So let me open up two maps for you.
I guess my question really goes to, are we working at cross purposes here where we're trying to direct growth under HOCO by Design to areas that are already overcrowded in the school system?
Well, I mean, to some extent, yes, because that's just the nature of where our infrastructure happens to be in the public service area. Our public service area happens to be where the majority of the schools are closed. So this is under right now. I'm just going to go ahead and share. Okay, so this just shows, this is our initial analysis of the governor's housing package, that HB 538 that came out last year. And the hatched area represents closed school districts. The yellow circle represents the eligible MARC train stations from the governor's housing package as determined by the state of Maryland. This has not been shared yet, but everyone knows what these are. These have all been listed as part of Department of Housing Community Development's list of the eligible train stations within Howard County. The only one that's open is the it's a Savage, not Savage. It's the MARC train station in Baltimore County is open, but if you look at the other 4 stations within Howard County where the TOD would apply, they're all closed schools. So that goes to that TOD, and where we would want to see increased development under the provisions of the governor's housing package. So as of right now, given what our current code states, these could not be acted upon because they are in closed districts. So someone could come through with an application, but right now under the preemption provision in the state law, we cannot forward these projects beyond I believe their technically complete submission, and they would have to finish up their plan after 4 years in the bin because they're in a closed school district. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm in HOCO by Design. We have done the activity center, I believe, as well. So that'll take me a minute to find that, so we can keep having the discussion, and I'll pull that one up as well. So Antoine, I believe, had a question while we're waiting.
Yes, I do. I don't mean to slightly divert, but I'm kind of going to Dan's idea of looking at idealistic versus realistic timelines. My question is, in the case of APFO, or at least the entirety of APFO having been applied, what's the fastest time that a project has started for APFO and completed? Because part of, I think, what I'm hearing is a process question. It's not, does APFO apply or not, but I'm hearing the time it takes to get through those tests. So is there any kind of measure or metric that says, hey, this group has gone through really quick, and what was that really quick? And obviously, not really quick sounds like 4 years. Is there anything of that sort that might have happened? Anybody have an answer? I don't really know, but that's my brain is, the process is too long in listening to all of this. And so is there a shortest that this has happened? Or is that like a non? That's all. That's my question.
If I could ask a clarification, Antoine, are you asking what was the shortest time that a project did an APFO test and then got passed to proceed?
Yes.
Wait, I'm not clear either. Do you mean that the schools reacted to an APFO closed situation and added capacity or built a new school within the 4-year delay that APFO provides?
I'm not just thinking of schools. I'm honestly asking across every type of facility project that APFO would have applied to in Howard County. What's the shortest time that someone could have started the APFO process and finished?
We haven't had anything denied because of water, sewer, or roads adequacies that I know of. As far as schools, I will tell you, we had a project come out of the bin recently because the school was opened for a short period of time, and they were able to squeak in along the Route 1 corridor, and then the school closed again. So like for a year time frame, because that happens like yearly. Okay. We reevaluate the schools. So it's a timing issue too. So it just happened to be a timing situation. I think they're in the bin maybe like a couple of years. So there's no rhyme or reason to it sometimes too. Antoine, just happened to be luck of the draw. But as far as I don't know, and I can't answer for the school system. In my recollection, or what I've heard, I don't know of anything where the school system has said, oh my gosh, the school is closed, someone's in the waiting bin, we're going to build a new addition. I don't think that really happens. I don't think that's fair to the school system either to say that they're going to do that sort of thing.
No, yeah, projects aren't with the school system aren't looked at as the APFO report says this is closed. We have to address that. Capacity is a factor in our capital projects, but it's looking at the capacity, the utilization, and what's projected more than an APFO test result.
Okay, no, that's helpful, and it's helpful to me. I'm sorry for bugging with everybody else's brains at this hour of the evening. I'm thinking the other direction. If the outcome is that this should happen faster so that we can meet capacity constraints and usability faster, how fast can faster happen? And trying to think of working backwards. So that's where my brain was going with that. Appreciate the responses. Thank you all.
Another question, looking at this 2024 feasibility study that Dan referenced earlier, and there's some needs and strategies for specific schools. And then I'm looking at the APFO open close chart that we've been provided. There's a slide on the 2024 report that talks about need in 2033, and the percentages are all different than what the APFO chart shows for those same schools. So I'm curious why there would be a disconnect there. I'm sure there might be a methodology issue or.
Well, one of the things to remember is the timing and purpose of the different reports. So the feasibilities, the best way to explain it is one's for the beginning of a process and one's for the end of a process. So the feasibility study is looking at the projections and where the needs are going to be, versus the APFO report is looking at the capital budgets that were approved, and it's kind of the end of the process. So they are looking at different points in that process. It can be very confusing, but they are looking at different points.
So then the APFO chart was approved in May, and I'm looking at this one of the schools that's in my neighborhood, and it shows, in 2033 usage around 90-ish%. But then the 2024 report that was issued in June shows, 103% and the need for continued use of portables in 10 years. And there's been portables at that school for, 5 to 10 years. So why would there be those two things were issued within 4 weeks from one another. So why is one showing there's no overcapacity? And I guess I hear what you're saying, but they were issued so close in time.
And that's part of what causes the confusion between the different documents, is the closeness of when they are reported. The APFO chart is the end or conclusion of the prior year. So it's using projections from the prior year, versus the feasibility study are using updated, newer projections. So that's one variation between the percentage of utilization. But you are expressing a point that we have heard before of the timing of when the reports do come out. That does cause that one of those confusions.
So there'll be another APFO report that comes out in May of this year?
Yes, there's an APFO report every single year in the springtime, yes. And then a new feasibility study or educational facility master plan that comes out in June, and it has to be submitted to the state by July 1.
Okay.
And then they come to planning board to present that information as well. Let me just go ahead and share my screen to the second part of the question regarding activity centers. So in the general plan, if you can see here, on the left is the activity center map. So the green, the bright green, the circle kind of dots, and then the polygons demonstrate the activity centers as identified in HOCO by design. On the right, at the time of HOCO by design, the tan and the hatch represent elementary and middle schools that were closed at the time of the plan's adoption. So as you can see, the majority of the activity centers, especially in the Southeast and the Ellicott City area, are in closed school districts. So not all, but the majority of which are in closed school districts at the time of the plan. And again, as Dan said, these are evaluated annually, so we may see these fluctuate as time goes on. And again, we haven't adopted a zoning category yet for activity centers, so they really have not been implemented, but not to say that someone can't develop in these activity centers, but just not to the full force and effect as envisioned by the general development plan. So just wanted to share that with you quickly since the question came up.
So we all have various relationships with council and the executive. They voted on HOCO by design, and they voted on a certain number of units that they're anticipating will be delivered on an annual basis in HOCO by design. And the majority of these units are in areas where the schools are closed. So
they voted on the thought that we would try to achieve. I mean, you can't make the units happen, right? We can't make the demand happen. What you can do is make the availability of the land, right? You can set the target. You can't make it happen.
No, I mean, obviously the development community has to decide that it's worth buying a piece of land and trying to deliver housing units in that specific area. And I guess my question is does the council or does the executive have the patience to be waiting 4 years, 5 years for units in the areas where they've decided they want units to go. Because that's what we've set ourselves up for here.
I can't answer that for you.
It's maybe not a question to ask with 5 minutes to go in our session, but it does strike me
We have
that
until 8:30 these days. Remember, we expanded our time. That's up to you. I'll defer to the group. I think Lisa raised her hand, and there's a couple more slides to go through to finish up our questions and a couple
Okay.
other things. So
just
anyway,
leave
let
it.
me
Yeah.
take this down. I think Lisa had a question as well.
I can wait till the end if you want. I basically wanted to talk about the goal conflicts that Todd had brought up, but I'll wait till you're done. Thanks.
Okay. So then how much is in the, so going back to the schools question, number 6, the schools long-range master plan, you can go to the capital budget to kind of see, and I think Vanessa had already said she had gone there to see where Brian Wood stood. Includes an additional 2,040 seats of K through 12 capacity to be added through the year 2034, which also includes pre-K capacity at Faulkner Ridge Elementary school, Faulkner Ridge Center, and a new elementary school, which would be elementary school number 43 to be added. And then what is the historical system-wide capacity utilization rate for elementary and middle and high projected? And that, as you can see, across all years, starting with 23, so to the next 10 years to 33, you know, we're well below 100% across elementary, middle, and high. So to me, that says we have adequate capacity throughout our school system, even if it seems like we didn't even. Now, let me ask you this: is this with adding these schools, Dan, or without adding those schools?
For the future ones,
Yes.
No, it's using it's using the school year 24-25 capacities, so it does not include adding the additional capacity that's in the long range master plan.
But it includes the projections of those future students.
Correct, the projections,
Wow,
but
so-
not the additional capacity.
Right, so our utilization rate will even theoretically be lower than those percentages in the next 10 years. So to some of the points that we were talking about with the addition of, even if we say school enrollment, even with people going to private school, even though enrollment countywide, whether they're going to public or private, just having children of school age in Howard County, it seems to me we still have adequate capacity of less than 100% available within Howard County school system in general. That's how I'm taking this chart for the next 10 years, because we're well below 100% across all 3 elementary, middle, and high school from this chart. So I think this is really interesting information. Thank you for sharing that.
And that does not include the 2,000 seats projected, right, Dan?
Correct.
Actually, if I can amend my statement, I spoke incorrectly. It does include that additional capacity that is in the boards. If you look at the bottom note there, future utilization based off of the 24 projection report, the current capacities, which are modified by the projects that are in the long range master plan. So yes, it does include that additional 2,000 seat capacity.
All right, so not quite as great, but still under 100%.
Correct. I apologize for miscommunication.
Yeah.
So are
So
those
that would
projects included in the APFO chart that we saw? Because there it looks like the capacity is flat the entire way through.
Sorry, if you could say that again.
Sure. The June 2024 APFO school capacity chart looks like it has school capacities that are flat from 2027 to 2037. So that these APFO charts don't reflect the additional capacity of a couple thousand seats that are in your capital budgets, your long-range capital budgets.
The capacity charts do reflect the Board of Education's requested FY25 capital budget projects. but they don't, because it's the end of the process, so it's not going to include the FY26, but the FY25 and 26, there was no difference.
I'm not sure how this fits in the future, but for a recommendation, we might want to think about somehow they can reconcile us looking at the same data, the feasibility and APFO somehow being the same thing. Because it's, as someone said earlier, it's given us two different stories.
And
Yeah,
that
and
is,
I'm sorry.
sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Todd.
Well, I'm a little confused. If headcount is flat in our projections looking forward, which we've been told repeatedly, and we're adding 2,000 seats, which is 3%, how can it be that our capacity utilization isn't improving by at least 3% across the whole system? Headcount's flat, we're adding 3%, our utilization rate has to go down by 3%.
Is
When
it
you look at the
because,
overall capacity throughout, but when you start to look down at the individual school level,
No, I know,
and the
but this is
variations,
this is the whole system. This is the whole system. I know individual schools are a different issue, but if we're adding 3% and we're not increasing our headcount, then our utilization rate has to go down by 3%.
depending on but what we have, yes, in general terms, yes, but what we have to remember is that the enrollment projections, while we are saying flat, when you look at it over time, it's flat, but they fluctuate through years. So as we look at individual years, there might be times when it goes up. But in general, yes, I understand what you're saying.
And Dan is not at the liberty to put in things like the Columbia Gateway project. And there are many more items coming down the path. What you're seeing is as if rezoning didn't add any additional density, or if we canceled the entire Columbia Gateway project. That's 20-some thousand people, up to 30,000 people. Those are factors you do not see here. And it would be very dangerous to draw conclusions without those considered.
Absolutely, Brent, but I would say the Gateway plan is a 30-year plan of not traditional suburban development that we're used to seeing in Howard County. It's really going to be more of, high-rise studio type of apartments. I mean, yes, we are understanding that there could be students generated from that, but not the typical levels that we have seen in other areas of Howard County. So yes, we do recognize that students will be generated from that, but I guess I would say it's not going to be what we have typically seen. So I wouldn't say that this is going to be a huge generator of traditional students that we've seen in the past from other types of large developments in Howard County. It is a very long range plan too. So it's not going to happen the minute the Gateway plan's adopted. And this is going to be a slow roll over 30 years.
I
And
appreciate
we're
that.
talking about 5,000 or 6,000 units, housing units, not 30,000 new people. 5,000 or 6,000 units.
Are the numbers on this chart that's up on the screen now, the percentages, are they lower than the May APFO chart? Because does this take into account the new capacity and the May APFO chart doesn't? Because the percentages on here are almost all across the board lower than the APFO chart that we've been provided previously.
System-wide.
Yeah, I'm looking at system-wide. So look at system-wide high schools in the APFO chart we were provided. It's over 100% in 2033. On this chart, we're at 95%. So what's the disconnect between the two charts?
Aaron,
I would
where's
have
the
to-
chart
I would
you're
have to look
looking
at
at?
it in
Where
detail
are
to
you
answer.
looking?
I'm looking at the chart that they provided us, or we were provided, the open closed June 2024 APFO chart. And I'm just, again, looking at the countywide totals at the bottom of each
Yeah,
chart.
but where is the chart? Is it in this notebook at a previous meeting?
Yeah, I think it
Where is the
was
chart?
meeting 3. It's page 137 of, I think it's meeting 3. And I also pulled it from, it's a little easier to read if you just go to the one that was adopted by the school board in, May of this year, because on the slides we received, it was very small.
That one was from meeting 5. That report was a separate attachment to meeting 5.
Okay.
Because that's where I was getting my numbers from that I was looking at before. And the high school total capacity is 97.5 on there. Middle school is 96.5. And elementary is 98.4.
I'm looking at I had the May 9th report that was on
That's what I'm talking about.
So for 2033 system-wide, I guess I was looking at high schools, it was 100.8%.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong year. I'm sorry. I was looking out at the end. 2033
Yeah,
is
2033.
100.3%, right?
Yeah, okay. I'm looking at the following. Yeah, so you're looking at 2022, 2023. Either way, it's a 5% difference than the chart that we were just looking at.
So I suspect one includes capital projects that the school has and one doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there is a note on here that says the APFO chart that it reflects the Board of Education's requested capacities. I don't know if that's the same as what the note is on the chart we were showed tonight.
Yeah, sorry, because I went back into the I'm going back into the folder here to go back to that meeting. And you said it was meeting number 3, and I'm in that folder.
It's on page 163.
I'm in the binder.
And I just see what you're saying, like, so I'm looking at, like the northern elementary schools are over 106%. But if we take all of them combined, would that be under 100%? Countywide total 99% for elementary.
Yeah, and then I would just look against the chart that you were just showing us. My suspicion, because the ones I was spot checking, the numbers on that chart were lower than on what was in the APFO chart.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Jane, you can just look into a little bit further. I don't want to prolong this.
Okay.
And maybe there's newer numbers that Dan's using.
I apologize. I will definitely look into it and get back to you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Okay. We just have a couple more things to get through, folks. I'll just finish up quickly. All right, so then the next question had to do with deferred maintenance. What is the current backlog of deferred maintenance? The most recent comprehensive maintenance plan is available on their webpage, so they provided that. So when you have time, you can go ahead and look through that. How much capital money is slated in the next 10 years? Again, they provided that information as well. And then finally, in terms of spending, which has priority for money maintenance or increased capacity? And again, it's on a case-by-case basis. All needs are balanced and planned according to board input and the best way to leverage the state contribution. There is no policy or board action that establishes prioritization of any type of project. So those are the questions that were put forward to the Howard County Public Schools. So thank you to Dan and Tim Rogers for taking those for us over the holidays. And I think Todd, did you have some other questions that we sent to the group that you also wanted to have a quick discussion on as well? And then I just
No.
wanted to go over as we get to voting, to finalize the evening.
Yeah, I'm fine, Linda. I think we've talked through and this thread pretty comprehensively. So I think we leave it at that.
Okay, great, thanks. And I see that Jeremy has his hand up as well as Lisa. Jeremy, you're muted. Nope, still can't hear you.
Sorry, are you able to hear
There
me
you go.
now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. My headphones were giving me a problem. So yeah, on these questions here, I just want to emphasize a point that I've been thinking a lot about based on reflecting on all the presentations we heard last year and some of these questions. And that is, like, we've learned there is a significant backlog of deferred maintenance needs in our schools. And we're also seeing, over this long range plan, the school system needs to invest significantly over the next 10 years on school renovations and school additions and new school capacity projects. And so when I'm thinking about adequate public facilities, like, to me, it seems the issue is one of a lack of revenue, that we don't have the revenue necessary to fund all of these things. And if we need to maintain, if we want to, as we all do, maintain adequate public facilities, it seems like we need more revenue. And so with that mindset, like, I'm looking at this Montgomery County APFO in which they utilize this utilization premium payment system, and it actually helps add money to the county's budget to provide adequate public facilities. And that's really intriguing. And I also appreciate suggestions that had been made in the public testimony on increasing recordation or transfer taxes when homes are sold. That also seems like a solution-oriented approach that could help actually, increase the money and the revenue needed for public facilities, whereas waiting a period of time and delaying development doesn't provide money. So I just wanted to make that point as we're having this conversation and reflecting on all we've heard so far to date. Thank you.
Okay, you want me to go? My comments were back with regard to wanting to address the concern about growth goals conflicting with APFO restrictions. And I just wanted to say that I believe when the council voted in HOCO by design, which is, a long plan, a long-term plan, that doesn't mean that they didn't also want to have the APFO pacing of that growth take place. So one doesn't necessarily negate the other. So we have to look at, and I agree with Jeremy completely, because, it really comes down to a money issue. And having APFO be less restrictive is not the only way to resolve the conflict of those two goals. I mean, we could talk about suggesting in the outside APFO areas that DPZ hasten their process. Takes 3 years right there. We could look at being more business friendly in general, which brings in more land use taxes than residential. We could look at other things to try to increase the money. And I like the idea of looking at certain fees because, like many have said, the waiting doesn't make the school capacity increase. And so time is money. And a lot of developers would probably be willing to pay the money. to wait less. I had talked in the past about coming up with some compromises, so it's not just all, the two sides of these decisions, but that we could reach some compromises about some things in APFO that treat everything the same versus looking at things differently, trying to make an analysis of, what types of things are adding more than other types of things, not having everybody be treated the same monetarily or waiting. And I just wanted to point out those thoughts. Thanks.
Sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just, when I hear people talk about money, and yes, a lot of people are going to be talking about money because there's a big budget shortfall. I think it's $3 billion for Maryland this year. I feel like when I hear people say that, what they're saying is someone else is going to pay that, not me. And if a developer is charged more money because, and I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm just saying that in Montgomery County, where the builder, comes in and, the builder is going to pass that cost onto the buyer, and the housing prices are going to go up, which when new builds go up, it affects the appraised value of resale. I just got my every third year rolling appraisal on my property, which is going to go up 20% in value over the next 3 years. So I feel like this is not going to be a solution of only charging people who are buying new homes or buying homes, period. That one of the things that I think it was the fire chief or somebody had said several meetings back is that the problem will not be solved by only charging new people or new construction, that you cannot put that cost on exclusively on those people, that some of these costs are going to also have to be borne by people who already live here, who already own homes here. That to say exclusively, let's add that to the cost of new construction. Well, let's look at how that's going to really flesh out. And I'll say it again, Maryland has the highest transfer and recordation charges of any state in the United States. We charge more than anybody else in transfer and recordation charges to buy and sell a home. And we want to add on to that, so I understand it's a money problem. Of course, money fixes all evils. Where are we going to find it? I don't know. But to think that we can simply dip into someone else's pocket to solve our problems, I think is really not fair to people who want to move here and want new construction, not fair to people who want to buy and sell their home, and that people who live here already, whether they buy, sell or not, or new, maybe they have to bear a portion of this cost as well. So I think we have to look beyond what are we charging, new construction? What are we charging transfer and recordation? What about people who are already here, right? Like, I think we have to think about all those things. Thank you.
Well, along those lines, I'm going to transition, if I could, Linda, unless there's another question or comment. Anybody? Linda has invited Holly Sun, the director of the county finances, and she also is she runs spending affordability. I'm running that committee with her. Very informative. She's going to make a presentation to us so we get a little better understanding as a group, as a committee, as to how county finances actually work, how capital projects are actually funded and paid for. We're talking about things, I think, without a very clear understanding of exactly how that works, what the county has to do when it goes to the bond market to issue the bonds, to generate the funds, to build the public facilities. All of that is pretty important to our process. So So she is on our schedule, I think, for the 22nd. Is that right, Linda?
Yeah, so really quickly, just a couple things. Yeah, thank you, Todd. So really our next meeting is January 22nd. Unfortunately, I will not be here, but Carl De Lorenzo will be me at the next meeting and helping run things. Holly Sung will be here to talk about those things of spending affordability and the kind of the budget process, more from the capital and how we raise money and how we spend money, how we bond money. And then Mary Kendall will be here to kind of circle back around and say, okay, we talked to you earlier in these sessions about HOCA by design, kind of what the APFO committee's charge was. Let's take a deeper dive. What are we going to be sticking to? Because guess what, folks, we need to start kind of getting some recommendations on the table. I think we've educated you to death. We need to start kind of putting our money where our mouth is. And so that's why and I appreciate Lisa sending out an email, and prior to us kind of having this conversation, she was just on the ball, so I appreciate that. But I think it's probably good if we try as best we can to meet in person starting really in February as we begin to make decisions for recommendations. And it's easier to do that in person than virtually for the most part. If you need to be virtual, we're going to continue to have a hybrid option. I think as many of us as we can be in person, probably the better. Understanding there's going to be inclement weather and stuff like that. So we'll make accommodations to maybe have some virtual meetings. But maybe for our February 5th meeting can be, I think it's the 5th. Yes, our February 5th meeting, if that can be in person, we can kind of take it from there and feel out the group. So we did reserve our Columbia Ellicott room as the room that we've been meeting in person to have an in-person meeting and kind of start to formulate what are we doing? What direction are we going? Because I think it would really be beneficial if we could get our recommendations kind of finalized by the end of March, beginning of April, and look to have a public hearing. I know everyone's on spring break the week of April 14th through the 18th, so maybe looking to have a public hearing maybe Wednesday the 23rd or the 30th. We have that penciled in for right now. So again, having the public hearing based on the recommendations that we would be putting forward. They don't have to be finalized. They're just the recommendations, not the final report. We need to give the public something to react to. So they need to be hearing what your kind of thoughts are. Again, so at the beginning, we heard about where the community would want to see you all think things through and what kind of direction they wanted to see APFO going. Now we've heard from them. You've been educated as much as we can. Now what direction you're going to go, and you're going to put those recommendations out on the table and then get solicit feedback from the community. Then you'll come back, deliberate a little bit more, and then finalize those recommendations, and we'll be forwarding them to council sometime, hopefully in May timeframe, May, June timeframe. So that's kind of the game plan and the timeline. So with that in mind, as you can see my screen, just to recap, we're going to start kind of having some votes, and probably one of our first votes might be on February 5th about what are we doing here, folks? I think the best thing is, what are we sticking to? What do we want to tackle in APFO? Are we going to do 10 million different APFO requirements and measures? Or are we going to really stick to what we have now? Maybe that's the first vote. So kind of really honing in what you all want to be doing. Fun fact, I think last time there were 62 recommendations that came out of the APFO committee. Lisa and Brent, you might have a really great memory and remember something different, but from what I was told, 62 recommendations and only 18 passed through council for a 23% success rate. Don't know if we really need to have 62 recommendations this time. Maybe we're a little more succinct and a little more tight on what those recommendations are to really get at what you want to do. Maybe that's a better course of action. I don't know. So we'll take it from there. That's still to be determined, but just some things to think about as we begin to move forward on this kind of journey that we're taking here together. So kind of again, how it goes and what we decided beginning at like our second meeting was the voting composition. So each appointed member that's here will be afforded one vote each. and you may not have a proxy for your vote. So if you don't show, you can't send someone else in your place. We're not doing any supermajority votes or anything like that. We're going to try to work toward a consensus. That's the goal, right? We all want to be on the same page. But if we can't do a consensus, we're going to go with the majority of the votes and the motion shall pass. We're going to do a motion. We're going to do a second. And for anyone who is in the dissent, we're going to take who that dissent is and what the dissenting vote is and what the dissent is, so that way we can keep track of what that thought process was, so we can be at least able to share everyone's opinion as it moves forward. So this was what our voting chart would look like. So the motion wording, what vote it was. We're going to keep track of how many different votes we've taken throughout the course, and that just could be an interesting statistic. We took 30 votes, 100 votes, whatever. What meeting we took the vote in, who made the motion, who was it seconded, passing tally, if there was a dissent, what the dissenting tally was, and then pass fail. If you think of anything else, you want to add anything else, let me know. This isn't fixed in stone. This is kind of our thought process, and this will all go into the report as we move forward. Brent, you had a question?
More background. Yes, you are correct. 9 years ago, me and Lisa were voting on these items, and yeah, there were a lot of items because we were going down different flavors or variations of a theme. But that committee was very land developer oriented versus citizen. I'm going to hold something up here. I know you can't read it directly. That's the letter from the head of the Home Builders Association of Maryland when he somehow acquired a vacant property adjacent to me that my aunt lived on, and she went missing and he demolished it during the hearings. That was my grandfather's home, part of our family estate, and certainly an intimidation item. Actually, it literally says member of the APFO committee back then. What I'm trying to draw from this is, I know you, right now, everything seems on the up and up. We're in good spirits. We're doing everything by the book and well-intentioned. But if you look historically back at our previous votes, they were done under a considerable amount of duress. And as you look through those things, I don't expect we're going to have an exact repeat of the same voting patterns, but there will be a repeat of many of the items brought up for consideration. So I hope everyone looks through it under that context and sees if there are improvements that can be made, because even though I tend to represent the PTA Council and their education interests, they had very little progress that enhanced APFO in the last session. It was almost exclusively handled in the legislative process that proceeded afterward. I'd like us to be more credible so we don't have to go to that level. But I think that's a very important thing that you need to be aware of, and just for myself, because it's the 9th anniversary of that happening, and it's very important to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can assure you, at least from a staff perspective, I would say every member in this group, I mean, everyone's doing things by the book and on the up and up. I don't think anyone has any ill intent, as part of this committee.
Like I said, it was the characters in the prior committee, but you do need to be aware of the history of these things as we go forward. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, 2 questions on voting. Is there a quorum requirement, or is it just
Absolutely.
a majority of anyone who shows up at the meeting?
No, we need a quorum to even have a meeting.
And a quorum, remind me, is 50% or 51%?
We said more than 50.
It's eight members, right? There's 15 votes, so.
That's correct.
So majority of
we
those
discussed
present.
it in the very
quorum of
first
8.
meeting. The very
Okay.
first meeting, we went over all that. Yeah.
Okay. We did, but my memory doesn't go back that far. Second question. In the report that was distributed at the first meeting, there were 17 votes or recommendations that were included. I just want to understand your earlier comment about 62 votes and 18 passed. Was it, there were only 17 recommendations included in the report that supposedly was the concluding report of the last APFO group. Do we know how many of those were adopted by the council, or were all of those adopted by the council?
That I'd have to get you the number on.
Because that's where it would have been drawn from, right? If that was what went to the council?
Correct. It would have been drawn from those recommendations.
Okay.
But I mean, they would get access to the whole report.
There were over 100 amendments to the APFO bill. It was quite considerable.
Right, but I assume that Linda was talking about what passed was what passed by the task force, not the council.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. We also had that section of outside of APFO recommendations that had a lot more consensus. Anyway, sort of that bin we created, because we've all been talking a lot about things outside of APFO that have kind of an indirect effect, and I'm sure we'll do that again, and that'll be well received, I'm sure.
Wrap it up, Linda.
Yep, that's all I have.
Two things. One, Dan, just not tonight, but if you can shoot out an email, I think it would be helpful to have some idea of a working number for a new elementary, a new middle, a new high school, land acquisition, design, engineering, construction, just to have an idea of the scope of what we're talking about. I honestly don't know if it's, 150 million for a high school and 100 for middle and 50. I don't know. So that would be helpful. We don't need to do it now. And secondly, just as a reminder to everyone, we talked about this very early on, but I want to hammer it home. We are formed as a result of the requirement to look at APFO within the context of HOCO by design. And the one really important, the most important chapter in HOCO by design for us is chapter 10, which really outlines what the master plan has asked the APFO committee to look at. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't yet, dive into HOCO by design, read as much of it as you can. Make sure you spend some time on chapter 10, because that's our really guiding document, chapter 10 of HOCO by design. So I'd ask you to do that in anticipation of the next meeting. I think it would be very helpful if we're all in the same in the same understanding of what HOCO by design has asked us to do. So please do that prior to the next meeting, to the extent that you have a couple hours to dive into it. So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Excuse me one moment. This is Lisa Kenny. I just had one thing to add here at the end. I recently updated the virtual binder to include everything you've received up to this point as far as presentations, meeting notes, and also testimony from the first APFO public hearing. It is on the website. Tomorrow I will be adding the items that were presented tonight as well. So just so everyone's aware, it includes everything. The link is on the website.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. All right. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a
So
motion
moved.
to adjourn.
And a second.
Thank you
I'll
all.
second.
Good night.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go home. Thanks, guys.
Stay
Good night,
safe.
all.
Good night, everyone.
Stay safe.
Thanks.
Good night.